Good. Well, let's call this meeting to order. And our first item of business is to approve two sets of minutes. John, do you want to walk us through that?
Certainly, yeah, there were some two sets of minutes were distributed to everyone. Minutes for December 4th, 2024, which were a minor modification was made to reflect some additional comments that Bianca offered. And then the minutes for our January 8th, 2025 meeting. I move that the board approve the December 4th, 2024 and January 8th, 2025 minutes.
Okay. Brian, do you have any comments on either of these minutes or want to see any changes to them?
I do not, but I would like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
John made the motion. You can second.
Oh, sorry. My kids were I had to yell at my kids for a second and I missed it.
So
Do you second it?
your second, Brian. Yeah, Brian seconded.
Okay.
Brian, do you approve the minutes?
I do.
John?
Yes.
And I do as well. Okay, well, we're not going to have a chair's report or a director's report today. We're going to get right into the business at hand. Our main goal today, although we have another agenda item towards the end, is to give clear direction about what we want to see on the new bills that roll out when we have time of use rates. And the first topic we want to discuss is solar and how solar output will appear on the bill. We're not going to today decide on how we're going to treat solar in terms of solar costs and what payments solar providers receive. What we want to do is figure out how does solar output appear on the bill and to see if no matter which route we take, the solar would appear the same. We have the same instructions for what we want on the bill. When Jason and Laura and I were talking about this, we saw at least two ways in which solar could be treated, but neither of them would lead to a very different appearance on the bill. And I want to go through all the possibilities. Personally, I do not have a clear sense of how I would like to see solar appear on the bill. I'm open to a range of possibilities, and we should now talk about what those possibilities are without making a case for any of them. These are just presenting, these are the possibilities. And I'll put one on the table that was raised, which has been done in some places, which is to assign a value of solar. You do a study and you say solar output is worth basically X cents per kilowatt hour. And then for every kilowatt hour of solar that is sold to the grid, the customer receives a payment at that rate. The appearance on the bill would be simply the output times the rate, leading to a number that gets deducted from the bill. That's one approach. I know, Brian, there is an approach you've argued for how solar should be treated. Can you discuss that and what would appear on the bill?
Yeah. So what you just described would be a solar tariff, and that's a
Oh, you're frozen.
what I'm suggesting is that people aren't
You
moving on the screen.
froze. You're still frozen on the screen, although
Hello?
now we can hear
Did I
you.
lose you?
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
I lost you. I don't
Well, while we wait for Brian to magically reappear, um, John, are there other approaches you could envision using for crediting solar output?
I guess what you suggested, Warren, made sense to me, that there be, as Brian characterized, effectively kind of a solar tariff where a study's done to establish the value of the solar output, and that customers who had solar PV in their rooftops would receive a credit for that. And that to me seems like an appropriate, reasonable solution. I have to say I haven't looked at kind of the full universe of alternatives out there, but what you suggested made sense to me.
Yeah. And I was not necessarily arguing for that. I was just saying that that was, Brian, you're back.
I apologize. My
No.
internet dropped.
Okay.
Um, so I don't know what happened in the interim, but yeah, what you described was a solar tariff, very common. What that does is it gives the same value for solar throughout the day. And what I'm suggesting is that we credit the what we have as charges for the different peaks. So on, mid, and off. So if you're providing generation during an off-peak hour, you're getting the off-peak credit. And if you're providing power when we need it, when we have high demand, you're getting the on-peak credit. This is essentially ensures that any round trip kilowatt hour is going to pay the distribution, the variable distribution, but they're going to be awash with the power supply part. So sorry, I'm a little flustered. I
Yeah.
got back on. But the idea is you credit solar customers for when they're providing electricity, not just the minimum generation value. This incentivizes them to invest into batteries and other things to.
Well, we're not making a case now. We're just trying
Oh,
to,
I'm not, all right, sorry.
we're not trying to decide this. We're only saying what are the possibilities. Bianca, we're trying to figure out what are the different ways on which we could um, reward solar providers for their output that's sold into the grid once we go to time of use rates to see if any of them require a different treatment on the bill. We're not trying to decide about this. That will come later in the process. We want to see if um, all of these can be accommodated in the bill design. So the first approach was a value of solar approach or solar tariff. Brian just explained the second approach. Does anybody have any other possible approaches that we might use? So,
Can I just ask a couple, would it be all right if I just asked a question?
yes, please.
So just, those are great options. Just on the first one, how often would you contemplate or have to
It
change
doesn't matter.
the rate?
We're not trying to decide
No,
this.
I know we're not trying to decide. I'm just trying to understand that option. Is that a thing that would be fixed for a year? That would be fixed for
We'd have to
5 years?
decide, we'd have
Okay.
to, if we took that approach, we'd have to decide it, we'd really have to study it and come up with a solution on that.
Okay.
And do you have another question?
Well, on the second option, my question was just, again, just for understanding on the option, is that something that we automatically know? So we would know when the rate, it would be sort of an automatic thing.
Brian, do you want to answer that? You're on mute.
So Cameron, it normally would be an annual update to a solar tariff. That's the way a lot of them do it. Concord right now, can I describe what we have today? Or is that too much, Warren?
This is not a discussion about what we're gonna do with solar.
Yeah, okay.
This
So
is strictly a discussion about the bill.
Yeah, so Cameron, the answer is it could be refreshed either as we do the day ahead rate today, the solar credit we do today, where it's every month it's a different value, or we could do an annual value like we do with all of our standard charge rates.
So Bianca,
Yeah, so regarding on the bill, one of the things that, and I find our current bill confusing even for me, when I'm looking at, what came from the solar, how is it credited? And the different charges to it. I mean, it's simple enough, but it's not something where I can just look at the bill and go, ah, yes. It requires like, okay, going into a little bit of I have to really pay close attention to what I'm looking at. So I would just say that because we're adding, we're adding a lot to this new bill. Depending on how we whether we do just a one flat credit or we do a time of use credit, I don't know if it's something that you want to put on the QR side or alongside the use and then the credit of the solar. But I think, my thought is you definitely want to try to simplify it as much as possible in terms of like the distribution and all that. Like, I think if it's going to get to be a lot.
well, we lost Brian again.
For a second,
Oh,
I turned off video.
oh, okay. So you were going to say something, Brian.
Everybody stop moving.
I think we can hear you, Brian. Can you say something?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm having technical issues, but do you mind, Warren, if I display what a solar bill looks like? I can show you what my bill looks like today. Because it is
Sure.
quite complex and confusing, but our bill, what we're talking about is going to be much simpler than what we have today.
But are you trying to share your screen?
Yeah, I don't know if I have to send a request. All right, so let's see. Can you see a CMLP bill?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So right now we have a meter reading for the consumption that my house has received. We have one for the generation, what I sent to CMLP. Then we have a net value for those two. And then I have an off and on peak time of use meter. You can see here that I've got one line, two lines. This is all the standard consumption. I have an extra solar fee, and this is my time of use section. So you can see this is the on-peak usage and the off-peak usage. All of this can collapse, well, three of these can collapse into on-peak. Three of these three can collapse into off-peak. The tiers will go away. But what I had asked for was to
Well,
keep.
look, we're not trying.
Okay.
All we're talking about now is how does solar output show on the bill?
Yeah, but my point is, what we're talking about with redesigning the bill layout and collapsing capacity and energy that is going to reduce the number of lines printed on the bill. And it's going to make these much simpler to read. The best way to reduce the number of lines is to get rid of special rates, which TOU should do. And that, I'll leave it at that, unless,
Okay, thank you.
all right,
Well,
I'm going to
we,
stop sharing.
at the moment, we should keep in mind these two possible solar approaches. And those are the only approaches that anybody's putting as a way that we would credit solar on the bills. And we need to keep both of those in mind. But let's go to the overall design of the bill. And Jason, do you want to share the input you got from the board?
Yes, I will do that right now. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so I put this, I left the presentation as is because I thought we may in this discussion pull up some of the other bill print options that we had looked at in the past. So I'm just going to kind of quickly scroll through all of those and end up with some general board feedback. So Warren had asked folks to send in their thoughts and feedback. And so I pulled out a few buckets here to show kind of where folks were leaning toward. I'll start go by row here. So in terms of showing data, everybody was on board with showing at least 12 months of data. I think there was a suggestion to maybe include at least 13 months so that people can see the same month the previous year. And also maybe even 14 months where I think Brian had suggested one of the bills showed the same month from the year or 2 years before. So if it's September, it would be September from 2 years ago, September from a year ago, and then the last 12 months. And so people could really see their usage over time. So there seemed to be a unanimous sentiment that we include at least 12 months on the bill. So we have that kind of decided. In terms of showing the time of use bucket on that graph, I think three of the light board members preferred seeing the time of use buckets within the graph bars. And then I think Brian preferred the bill that did not have it broken out for simplicity's sake, just looking at the overall usage. And I think Brian's maybe the reason why he wanted to do that, and Brian, feel free to jump in, but he preferred to see like the solar generation portion of your electricity shaded a different color in the same bar graph. So you can see your total usage and then which part you got from CMLP and which part you generated from your own solar. Is that correct, Brian?
Yes, I think once you add in the solar or bidirectional energy, it gets very busy. And a graph or on a bill, it should be within the QR code for that level of detail is what I feel. And the table of those values, I think, should be on the meter readings that I showed in my mock-up.
And then I'll go to the QR code. Everybody liked having a QR code. I'll remind people that the QR code, at least right now, we haven't got any indication otherwise, is going to go to a static page that can have a lot of information to dive deep into your bill and the layout of it, but it is not going to be a specific landing page for that bill that's going to have like representative data from your customer account. It can either go to sort of your smart hub and let you pull up additional, billing information, past bills, things like that, or it can go to a page that we're envisioning that would be a landing page to explain time of use. There can be animated ways to show your bill, hover over this and kind of dive into what that is, what the graph represents, what time of use is, how you can save, like all sorts of components of your bill that can be dynamic and provide more information. But I did just want to say it's not going to dive into your specific bill unless it's bringing you right to Smart Hub. But that's something we can investigate with NASC to understand what's possible. But today we know that that's where we're at. Warren, do you want to take questions now?
Sure. Bianca.
Yeah, so on that, regarding that QR code and going to the specific bill, can we ask, I know if I understand correctly, is this is the step where we're working with our provider who's going to be designing all of this, right?
Yep.
So what about like we we ask for more. And then the more side being like the being able to dive into the specific bill of maybe going into the details of the solar breakout, like, well, how much generation did my solar panel produce during peak hours or off peak hours, and break that out so that we have it, but then not have it printed, just have it on a separate, like, put it into Smart Hub somewhere, where the QR code could then go to that section of the Smart Hub so that people can get interactive data on the specific bill. Is that a lot to ask? Or is that Laura's saying, yes, that's a lot to ask.
Well, I think if it's something that they've already developed and that exists and they just need to tailor it for us, it's reasonable for us to get it done before time of use goes live. If it's something that they think sounds cool and has not been yet developed, I would not say that it would probably be ready in time for our launch of time of use. But we could certainly inquire and find out. But I think our sense is that diving into a specific bill probably would not be ready for January of next year.
So Jason, if you could keep going.
I think Brian raised his hand too.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
That's all right. So my only feedback was Jason described what I would call a very GUI interface for that QR code. And I just want to make sure that that interface has you know, a comma delimited or comma separated file that is just simple each meter hourly data in a spreadsheet. Because there are people like me that are going to want to look at that information without someone else already filtering it before I see it. I saw my screen freeze for a bit. Did everybody get
Yep.
that?
Yeah, we did. Well, it seems clear we got to find out from the vendor what sort of information we can put on a place other than the bill. Laura.
Thank you. I just wanted to bring to the board's attention that the two alternatives discussed so far would have very different bill prints. In the case of the number one, the bill would look very similar to today, where there would just be one line item for the credit for the solar. It would just say, like, today we have excess generation credit. It's a one line item, and it has that changing monthly price that Brian mentioned. And the door number one that you mentioned would have just the one line item, regardless of the time of day. It would be the solar credit. Here's what it is. Here's how many solar units. Multiply the two together. That's the dollar value. The second one would follow more along the lines of how it's currently done, and will require many more line items on the bill. It would also require the board to figure out arithmetically how it would work if we keep the same billing methodology we currently have, which is that there's a credit at the retail rate 1-for-1 up to the amount delivered, and over that is a different rate. Because if we apply that methodology to each tier, then the board has to decide, let's say somebody produced, 600 kilowatt hours of solar during the on-peak, and they only used 400. They have an excess of 200. Is that going to then roll down to the mid layer so that they can get their deliveries on the mid layer without going to the wholesale rate? I didn't explain that very well. We'll have to use a numeric example, but that if we use the current billing for solar, we need a lot more line items. If we go to the approach that Warren mentioned, it would be one single line item on the bill, which we already have, by the way. So I don't think it'd be much bill print change, programming change.
So
Thanks.
have
We're getting back in. We were at.
no, this is important, Warren. Sorry,
Okay.
this is important. So what we're doing, talking about how it's going to be displayed and looking for simplicity before we have a design of how this rate is going to function. You're limiting your options. You're making a decision before you've thought about it. So I don't want to say that we want minimal line items, and so we're going to do a solar tariff function because we're not going to pay people for when they provide electricity and get rid of that whole rate structure portion because now our bills can't display it.
Yes, we will come back to, let's come back to that point, and we'll come back to solar. I just wanted Jason to finish his
Yep.
presentation of the input he got from the board about the bill in general,
Yep.
not specifically about solar.
All right, I'll keep moving. So in terms of collapsing the capacity transmission, energy and distribution charges into a single time of use bucket, the board was all supportive of that, with the one exception being Brian's preference to leave out the distribution rate so that that can be clearly credited to a solar customer if that's the way that the board goes. So everybody generally was in agreement of collapsing to simplify the bill so that there wouldn't be 3 buckets per time of use. So ending up with 9 or 6 buckets, depending on how many time of use periods there are within a day. I also had some other feedback points here in terms of the bills. So one person explicitly preferred the Cobb EMC bill example. One person preferred the SMUD. One person thought they were all a little bit too cluttered, and that there were, there's some guidance on which ones were better. I think the Cobb EMC still rose to the top for this person, but just encouraged more white space and making sure that I think we had a great conversation about what simplicity means. It's not that it doesn't contain information, it's just that it's presented in a way that people can easily understand it, and that there's not too much information, and that we could utilize a system of bringing people to the website to explain more without having to try to explain it all on the same piece of paper. I mentioned this about the at least 13 months instead of 12 months, just so that the graph contains the same month in the previous year. So 2 people brought that up as a preference. There was a conversation about making sure the bill includes what the actual time of day, the different time of use buckets are. So if we're having a peak, an off peak, a peak, and a super peak, or however we want to phrase it, that people understand what those times of the day are, and then that's clear on the bill. I think we determined only the SMUD bill had it, and it was just a single text little area that explained what that was, but just making sure that people have that. There was another piece that I thought might be a good question to pose to the board, but somebody had suggested that the ways to save, which was featured on the SMUD bill, maybe be left off because if people aren't shifting their behavior based just on the new rates, then they're probably not going to do it there. But I didn't know, Warren, if you wanted to get some feedback from other board members on that, like how much of an effort we should, or a priority we should put on offering people either information on the bill or just directing them to a website. It could be concordma.gov/save, or something simple. Where there could be tips or tools or calculators that people could employ to shift their load to save themselves money.
Well, when you finish going through the feedback,
Okay.
and then
Yep.
we'll discuss.
And Brian didn't offer as much text feedback as he did offer visual feedback in the mock-up bill. So I included what Brian had here to show what his bill proposal looked like. So again, we can focus on just the elements. The graph there has 13 months, the same January data from the previous year. It breaks it out into generated versus net usage there for somebody who has solar. It maintains the temperature, line chart there embedded on that so that people can see what the temperature looked like. QR code to provide more information, and then up above the breakouts of how he envisioned the different line items for delivery, energy, and then adjustments like the power cost adjustments and the NYPA credit. Brian, did you want to make any other comments on, this is just the summer one. I know you included a winter one, which I could pull up. It's not in the presentation, but did you want to offer any comments on this?
Yeah, so actually this text down below the graph says to add the 2023 of January. But importantly, up on the meter line, it has the same meter information that we show in the bill today, with the when being the on, mid, and off values. So if you add those up, they add up to the 835. So people can know when they consumed the electricity within the buckets. Um, the three main categories, the delivery, energy, and adjustments, are separated. So delivery is what we operate the light plant off of. And it's clearly separated from the power supply, which are the pass-through costs that we send to the customers. And then adjustments and clauses are their own little complicated lines. But the idea is you can talk to a customer and say, look, you can save on your electric bill in the energy area and still consume the same amount of energy by shifting your load. But everybody still has to pay for the operations of the light plant, which is delivery. And based on previous conversations with the board, I separated out the meter fee. So you see the 650 and the 1350 add up to the $20 meter fee that we collect today. So if someone has a second meter installed, you get two billable units, and that becomes $13 instead of just 650. And then the 1350 is the fixed method of collection for distribution costs. The variable based on usage is there separately, but the two of them are together because they collect for the same thing. And if you have solar, that billable units is everything sent to the customer. So if you net meter, you're still paying that distribution, that variable distribution. And then the on, mid, and off peak are the net value for solar customers. So if you sent them, if you sent the light plant, 500 kilowatt hours, and a portion of that was, I'm making up numbers and I shouldn't, but the net actions of each peak period is what is billed for or credited for. And then the clauses apply. And it might be helpful to show the winter ETS example.
Well, let's leave that out for a second.
Okay.
Let's come back to that. And I want to thank you. And let's leave Brian's mock-up on the screen because I think it's a good starting point for discussion. Let's address some of the specific questions that came up. One has to do with the graph. It seems everybody wants to show a graph. Three of us wanted the graph to show consumption by different time of use rates, so people can see whether they've been successful in switching their use over time to lower charge periods. Brian wants to show the solar output because that is very helpful to solar customers. One question I have is, would it be possible to have two different bill approaches, that if somebody is a solar customer, the graph would be like this one, which shows their generation and net output. But if somebody isn't a solar customer, the graph would show their use by the different time of use rates.
The first thing I wanted to say about that is we don't really know how much solar customers generate for the most part. We know how much they send back to the system. So I don't know if generated is the right word. Brian, are you imagining that's what you're pushing back?
I think I used the word supply. Let me.
In the
Well,
chart,
on your graph there, you have generated.
Well, that's what exists on the bill today. I just
oh, okay.
copied the
Okay.
exact bill that I received, a little scan.
Got it. Okay. So I guess the first question, Warren, that you had was, is it possible for us for the same rate to end up with a different graph. And I guess that might be a question for Carol or Laura. Do either of you know the answer to that today? If for the same rate that we can put, if one customer has solar and one customer doesn't, that the graph that displays could be different.
Yeah, so that basically if somebody's a solar customer, they get a graph like this. If they're not a solar customer, they get a graph with each of those
Right, like
bars
the,
divided into three, like there.
yeah.
So we don't know the answer to that definitively. My suspicion is that if it is a different, technically in NISC speak, if it's a different rate, it's probably possible to do a different bill print. But if it's the same rate, I don't think it's possible to split out a certain subset of customers from others. That's more of a technicality, you know, we'd have to investigate that. But
Yeah.
it is going to introduce more complication.
Well, I mean, I think it's worth asking about it, and then we could see what to do. Bianca.
Yeah, so I have, this layout, because I'm a solar customer, and I would want to know, I mean, if we're trying to get people to change their behavior, personally, I would want to know, where are we using it, energy, you know, because if let's say, well, I didn't do laundry, or we don't do dishes until such hour, we don't, but there's a big bill, and there's, you know, it's being used on peak hours. Well, then it's on us to go figure out what's being turned on, you know? So I would want to know how much is being consumed by the different buckets. My suggestion is, instead of the net to me, net is not very informative. What I'm thinking is we could do something like this, like you could do the amount of energy used broken out by 3 buckets, and then the amount of solar energy generated broken out by the 3 buckets. And the net will be, you know, clear on the bill in terms of the delivery and the production. But at least graph wise, we could see, okay, well, you know, my usage is being matched with my generation, or it's not. But I would definitely know when we are consuming energy, and you know, what we got to watch out for, you know.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Laura.
I just want to point out on this mock-up bill that Brian has put forward, and I know you don't want to talk about what the solar rate's going to be, but it's important for the bill print, because this bill contemplates changing the way we credit solar. I have to repeat that we credit solar at the retail rate, but only up to the quantity delivered. On this bill print, this contemplates crediting solar at the retail rate, regardless of how many units are generated versus how many are delivered. In other words, if each one of these lines under solar, or not solar, under energy, billable units, if each one of those were negative, that the customer overproduced all month, okay, and they sent CMLP more than they bought from CMLP, they'd be being credited the retail rate. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? Am I
Yeah.
explaining it well?
Yes.
So Laura, it's not the full retail rate because distribution is not being credited.
Okay, fair enough.
So today they get the full retail rate within the billing period, and they get the lowest value for generation only if they do a net monthly generation and they don't consume. So this actually raises my my solar bill, this change in methodology, because it collects more distribution.
Okay, just keep in mind this, if we're going to collect all the fixed costs in just the distribution portion, it's not going to be 6.5 cents.
Yeah, I had a different comment.
Can we
Well, it was about the
discussion
graph.
of solar for the sec?
We can't, Warren. That's the problem. We
Yeah.
can't. We can't sideline solar because we're trying to do the way we display the bill dictates it curtails what we can do in the rate structure. So,
Right, that is true, but we will come back to solar. I just wanted to,
well,
I
can I
want to
give
go
my,
through issues one at a time, and I want to focus at the moment on the issue just of the appearance of this graph.
so yes, that's what I wanted to get back to, because I actually had a comment on the appearance of the graph.
Okay, thanks.
So I am not opposed to showing the time periods in the graph. But I do know that beyond a simple consumption bill, it is going to get more complicated. I would like to share the example of the mock-up I did for winter, because it has a special rate and it has more meter data. Can I share that?
Yeah, sure. Well, Jason, oh, you don't have that in this.
I have it up and ready.
Okay,
I've got
please.
to go ahead, Brian.
So here is a solar customer with ETS. It's this section where you have a table that lists out that month's each meter what you used. So you can see that you generated 35 kilowatt hours during on peak. You generated 75 during mid peak with a total of 158. And you had consumed, 15, 24, and then you had consumed under the discounted rate. So the ETS doesn't pay full distribution, so they get that discounted rate for what goes through that meter. But if you were to do this under our current billing, you would see an even busier bill than the solar bill that I get today, because it has ETS added to it. So this summarizes and collapses things. I want to keep the graph simple, but I'm not opposed to, showing the 3 layers per month. But I think once you add in generation, you really got to go the QR code, because you're displaying a lot of information that will confuse customers.
Yes.
All right,
John,
Jerry.
Yeah, I think that given that we are moving to time of use rates, it is important to show the different time of day periods and parties' consumption there. I'm wondering, is there a potential compromise here, recognizing that, Brian is very focused in terms of reflecting the net energy supplied. Would it be possible to frame the bill information in terms of the net consumption of customers, so that for each of these, assuming we have 3 time of day periods, the consumption would be netted for any supply during those 3 periods?
anybody have any comments on that?
I would support it.
I think that sounds good. The only question then goes back to what Laura said, which is, what about people that are overproducing for the month? Like if you're away or whatnot, then that would,
So now
guess-
you're talking about the rate schedule and more than the display of the data.
so you mean it would just show the negative bars instead of positive use? It
Yep.
would show negative by time. Yeah, that works.
Okay, so on that, Jason, can we go back to the presentation with the summer graph?
Yes.
So we're saying for the moment, in terms of the graph, we will show consumption by time of day. We'll do it for the net consumption. And I would also argue for taking off the average temperature, which is not particularly useful information. People know it's hotter in July than it is in January. John, then Bianca.
I'm wondering if we could, as an alternative to showing average temperature, show heating and cooling degree days. To me, that's really what drives consumption. And I realize there's some additional complexity here, but recognizing that heating degree days in the winter is going to be when people would be using if they have electric heat, and in the summer, cooling degree days would be, if that's something that would be easy enough to do, that might be more meaningful than just showing average temperature.
Bianca?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about for heat pumps, customers who have heat pumps, do they have, I thought I understood they have special meters and a special rate for that. Is that correct?
So you have
Today,
ETS, not heat pumps.
so today there's an R7 rate, and that's a special rate to avoid the higher tiers. So if we're changing the rate structure to TOU, we don't have to avoid tiers because they don't exist.
Okay, so the only thing there is that people then with heat pumps would not be able to lower their load in, during, in the winter months, right? In the summer months, you can argue, turn on fans or whatever, but in the winter months, especially the very cold ones like this one, you wouldn't be able to change your habits or turn off the heat pumps during the peak.
Laura, do you want to speak on that? Because I saw you had an email with some great information.
Yeah, so you're right, Bianca, that it's generally accepted to get the most efficiency out of a heat pump. You don't want to cycle it. You want to set it and let it run continuously. However, our studies have shown, we went back and looked at actual heat pump hourly usage and compared how those customers fared under the R7 rate compared to how they would have fared under our current time of use rate. And in all but a couple of cases, they actually did better on time of use than they did on the R7 rate. And I believe the reason is because even though the heat pumps are running continuously, they are running more when it's colder, and it's colder at night when the price is the cheapest. So it's not a huge difference, but in general, even though they're running continuously, they're going to benefit from the time of use rate.
Okay.
I want to zero in just on the graph to be able to give clear guidance. We're talking about showing each month divided by the different time of use rates for net use for solar customers. And the question is whether we should include heating and cooling days. I would go with the majority. I'll give you my preference. My preference is only giving people the basic essential information they need and making the bill as uncluttered as possible and have explanatory material on the website that they get to by a QR code. I think I will defer to others if you want to put on heating and cooling days. The reason I wouldn't do it, but I'll defer if others prefer it, is that if you put it on a typical bill, what you'll learn is there are more heating and cooling days in a month like August than there is in a month like September. But we know that already. People sense that, which times of the year there's tends to be greater use. Heating and cooling days are most useful when you're comparing year to year, when you're looking at this January versus last January as an explanation for why your use has gone up or down. But since we're only showing 13 months, you're not able to make those comparisons very easily. So I would tend to, on the website, have maybe a 5-year graph of heating and cooling days for those folks who are interested in it. But if somebody wants to argue for it, I wouldn't, die on my sword about that. I don't know John, what you think?
Warren, I saw lots of thumbs up from Brian and Bianca, and I agree. You've framed it well. So I just want
Okay.
to throw out there an idea and appreciate your comments. Yeah.
Let's keep average temperature off then, heating and cooling days off.
How about
So,
number of months, Warren, the 13 or 14, or
Yeah,
since
I
everybody
thought
agreed-
we had gone on to 14.
yeah, so 13, so it would be the 13 months plus the same month 2 years earlier.
So 14.
that's Brian's proposal, yeah. I just want to see if
The
everybody,
14th, sorry, the 14th month in this case would be January 2023.
correct. On that graph, yep.
I'm okay with, what do other folks think?
I think it's great.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
Okay, 14 months, good. So then the next thing, and I think I will present my view here, which I think Bianca and John tended to share. And Brian, then you could try to argue us out of it. I would tend to have one line for fixed charges, not divide meter charge versus fixed distribution charge, because I think keeping the bill as simple as possible. Here's the fixed thing we're paying for. And if you want to understand how we got to that, you go to use the QR code and you have it broken down. I would say the same thing and not breaking out distribution from capacity and transmission, one line for fixed charges, and then the information about energy use. The average customer, that's gonna be much easier for them to understand. I find this bill way too complex to make it easy for folks to figure out. But Brian, you should try to make the case, because I think when the three of us reacted to this initially, we were in favor of one line on fixed charges and then the energy.
Yeah, I think um, the reason that the meter charge and the fixed collection are separated is based solely on board discussions in the past and the confusion around when someone has the second meter fee, that $6.50 above the 20 today. I don't mind if that should, if we make the fixed collection $20 instead of 13 in this example, and hide the meter charge line, and for those customers that have the second meter, that line appears, that's fine. But I thought this was a simpler way to display on the bill for the board in the way we've talked about rates. The distribution charge per kilowatt hour, I have a very strong feeling on this one, and that is that it should be in the delivery section, because that is collecting for the cost of delivering power. The energy section is the pass-through cost. That's the actual power and what power costs when it's consumed. So I really strongly feel those two should be separated, because they're vastly different things.
How about just relabeling the other, rather than labeling it energy? You label it energy and variable distribution charge, and because you're still charging it for the 835 kilowatt hours for everything.
Yeah, the label doesn't matter as much to me. That word energy comes from our current billing. It's also used in a lot of the billing examples. If you want to call it the power supply charge, that's what it is. But as long as it's clear to the customer and to the board and to anyone looking at this billing structure to say, this is the delivery is what pays for the light plant's existence, and the energy or power supply or whatever you want to call it section is what is being bought from me in the market based on my behavior. And that's the part that I can change because I can change my behavior. Then when Carol is talking to a customer that says, hey, I want to save on my bill, she can focus her or that customer on this middle section, the energy section in the example, to say, hey, what you want to do is shift load, and the more you have in off peak and the less you have in the on peaks, well, you're saving money for the same amount of power provided. And if someone wants to add solar, they'll see the energy section reduced, but the distribution section will still collect for everything sent to the customer. There might be some behind the meter solar generation and consumption that exists today that we don't bill for, but they're still paying their way. And if someone wants to invest into a battery to avoid those on and mid peaks, they now have an incentive to do so. But every time they're charging that battery, they're paying their distribution, and they're not getting a retail credit in any kind of way. So I just think it's a simple way to show a lot of information, a lot of complex information. But that's me. I've overthought this. So
No. I see. I'm just not sure the average person's going to get all that from just putting that line on the bill. But
yeah, I'm thinking multiple audiences. What the end customer should know is delivery pays for the operations of the light plant. Energy is your share of what you consumed through it.
John,
Yeah, I have to say, what Brian's saying resonates with me. I feel like, yeah, there is some additional complexity here, and we have said that simplicity is an objective, but I do think that it will be helpful in terms of for people who really want to understand their bills to providing this additional information. And I think what Brian's suggesting makes sense from my perspective.
okay. So under this approach, we would collapse the meter charge and the fixed distribution charge into one meter charge. There would be a variable distribution charge. And then we'd have energy with three
Yeah,
lines.
I would just be careful of when you say collapsing the fixed distribution charge and the meter charge. I don't like the name meter charge when it applies to both, because when we add a second meter fee to the bill, they're like, I already paid my $20 meter charge. What's this $6.50?
Yeah, I
So
would
just
label it fixed charge myself.
okay, or it could just be fixed delivery fee. Whatever you want.
Okay, so yeah,
I'm okay with collapsing it back to $20. I just don't like the label meter charge for the $20.
Is that something we need to settle today?
no,
Okay.
no. I mean, so Bianca, are you comfortable with the approach, one line for fixed charge, one line for variable? I don't like the term variable distribution charge, but one line for,
Per kilowatt hour.
for the kilowatt hour charge, and then we have people's use by on-peak, mid-peak, and off-peak.
Yeah, I think it should just be one, that whatever you want to call it, whether it's fixed or, but I think I would, I would clump this variable distribution charge, fixed distribution meter charge into one. You know, it's the delivery charge.
Ooh, I can't
And
support that.
I mean, it's just a bill presentation, to make it simple. I think the vast majority of people don't care about the breakout. But obviously, this is information that we already collect, and it's going to be available if you want to go into Smart Hub. I would imagine that if you log into Smart Hub, that you can, you know, go into the delivery charge to figure out what's going on. But I think the less we have on there, the better. So we have a delivery charge, and then we have an energy charge. And the energy charge, you know, broken out by on peak, off peak, mid peak, or whatever.
So, John,
I think Bianca, what you're suggesting is if you roll this variable distribution charge into kind of the fixed charges, that has significant rate implications, right? I think what would happen then was that that fixed charge would go up dramatically. So I think that's why you want this. You know, maybe the term isn't appropriate, variable distribution charge, but the point is that that should vary with the customer's consumption as opposed to it being a fixed charge, which would be the same for all customers.
Yeah, and they're two separate calculations.
Yeah, I mean, it's whatever. I'm not suggesting that we change the rate structure. What I'm trying to say is like, there should be some simplicity to it. I mean, I think a delivery charge is, it's vague enough to say like, this is the delivery charge. If you want to know, you know, what goes into the delivery charge, go to Smart Hub and you'll see that there's a variable distribution charge, a fixed distribution charge. I think for most people, they wouldn't know what that is, you know, and I'm not suggesting at all that we change any of our structure, but just that there's a lot, you know, there's
yeah,
a lot of this, like, does it really matter that the variable distribution charge goes up or down with the energy you consume? Yes and no, you know.
Yes,
Um,
sorry.
it's, you know, it
does.
matters to us because we're trying to make sure that the rates and everything that, you know, is fair, equitable, and that it makes sense for CMLP. But for somebody, but at the end of the day, the customer wants to know, what can I do to save money? What can I do to lower my bill charge? And there's nothing that they can really do on that end, you know,
Uh,
except don't use energy.
yes, that is something they can do, and that would affect only the variable portion of that charge. I'm worried that it would end up being delivery fee 74.78, and then no explanation of how that's calculated when the rate structure clearly shows how it is calculated. I think that is
Yeah, I mean,
there.
I,
If
I
I
do
would like to
understand
actually
what you're
show
saying.
some of,
Brian, I'm just sharing my opinion more
I
and
know.
ask my
yeah.
opinion.
Well, I mean, I think we have two choices. One is the way Brian and then John were suggesting this with fixed charge, variable distribution charge, or the other alternative is to put the variable distribution charge within the energy portion of the bill,
Ooh,
so that you just have at the top, rather than delivery and energy, you just have fixed charge, and then you have energy, and energy includes variable distribution charge. Those seem like the only two viable options, because I do think if you have a line fixed charge that includes the variable in it, and that changes every month, people are going to get very confused if you're saying they're not going to know how that's calculated. We'd have to give them some indication of that. So I think those are the two alternatives. Um, My
we-
preference would probably be to move the variable distribution charge into the energy, but if I would tend to defer to John and Brian if they feel strongly about keeping the variable up above under delivery.
Yeah. Also, it would be helpful because I think this is a very simple display of billing. Can we go back to some of those other utility examples to show how complex their bills look? Um, yeah,
Yeah.
so here you can see they have that distribution fee. They have a DWR energy credit. They have two separate, periods of on and off peak, and so forth. This is a solar bill, I just realized. That's why they have two sections. Here, this is so simple, it's kind of hard to understand what's going on. And you're heavily reliant on the graph to tell you how much you're doing on or off peak. And I
Yeah,
can't.
see, I like that there's too
You
much
like the graph?
clutter on this bill. If you got rid of ways to save important information, other stuff, that one charge, that current charge, divided into service charge, on-peak charge, off-peak charge, that's really clear and easy. What's bad about that?
Well, so first off, the chart, I don't have any meter readings on this bill. So I don't know what the previous meter value was, what the new meter value was, and what time periods I consumed electricity. I see the results in this tiny little graph, but I can't quantify it.
But if you made the graph much bigger, like the graph we were going to have, it would be pretty easy.
Well, how could you tell if that orange bar in August is, 100 kilowatts of orange versus 90 kilowatts of orange? There's no real way to do that. And
But I
this,
don't see how the bill you have gives that information either.
oh, it's up in the top right next to the meter. So the meter says yes. So you see that so 65 on,
Okay.
270 mid, 500 off. So that's equivalent to that striped graph, but it's just table form instead of chart form.
I mean, we could have both, as we do today. We can have the meter
Yeah.
readings up top in a table, and we could have the chart down below.
Yeah.
Yeah, your meter reading at the top is good, but going back to the other one, the current charges, having a table just like that.
So
But
how are we creating energy wise customers with this bill? It's it's so simple to be useless for someone to take action on. You still walk away with the same sense of time of use, which is avoid on peak and use off peak. But there's no real feedback on your actions in this bill. And the service charge, we have a variable component to that. I don't know how, um, you know, if that was to change every month and it would just say $29 one month and then it says, $50.30 the next month. Well, why is it jumping around? How am I being charged that? Why what kilowatt hours are part of that calculation, and it's not the full calculation because there's a fixed component. I think this is lack of information. Our customers won't be able to take any kind of real action because they don't have the tool to work with.
I,
I've over the,
I
I've talked to a lot of people about electric bills, and the first thing that happens when someone's thinking about solar, a heat pump, an EV is they sit down with me and they share their electric bills. And if this was what they were able to share with me to be an advocate and kind of explain things and what they could do, it's useless. It's useless to solar installers to do estimates. It's useless to because it's oversimplified.
Let's go back to your proposed bill again.
I don't have a problem with Brian's proposed bill.
Okay.
You know, just, I think I mean, the delivery charge, I guess it's clearly labeled delivery charge there and it's broken out. That's fine. I mean, and I think it's very important that it's useful to solar installers. So if that's information that's going to be useful to the solar installers, that's fine.
Okay.
I mean, it's information that we're going to have anyway, regardless on the Smart Hub, I would hope.
Yeah.
You know,
John?
Yeah, so, and I'm assuming that the graphic shown here, are we in agreement that the graphic would break out consumption by the time of day?
Yes. Yes, we already said that.
Okay,
Yes.
so this does not give me heartburn, this bill.
And this, let me ask for Jason and Laura, this is implying this is a bill that doesn't have people's name and address on this page. In a sense, it's a two-page bill. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Laura or Carol, are there other questions that we have that we'll need to answer for NISC so we can get the ball rolling on the design?
I think it's going to be a matter of as we start to peel back the layers on it, so to speak, and start working on it, questions will come up at that point. But I think at least for now, we've got enough direction to start.
Okay. Warren, is there anything else you wanted to?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to simplify it, but I guess
I think to Carol's point, as we try to implement these things, NISC may come back to us with questions and options, and it is incredibly likely that at a future board meeting, we're gonna need to get some clarification on some of these things. If something is, for example, not possible exactly as the board wished, and which compromise do we have to make in this way or that way. But in general, I feel like we've answered the big questions that we needed answered. So I
good.
feel like we can take this to NISC.
Let me raise one other thing on that. If you could show Brian's bill,
Yep.
which
The
I
mock-up.
wonder
actual
about,
bill.
but maybe it's not doable. I would love to see when it comes to the on-peak, mid-peak, and off-peak rates, rather than it presented as a dollar amount, which a lot of people, the numbers are just too big. Whether instead it could say 4.5 cents, 2.3 cents, or 23, sorry, 20,
Right.
45 cents,
Yeah.
23 cents, 8 cents. I just think those numbers with all the decimal points and done as a dollar, it's hard for the average person to understand. If we could present the on-peak and mid-peak and off-peak rates clearly in cents, it would be much easier for people to read.
I think Bianca had that same comment too in her message to us. And I see John nodding, so
Well, you can't see me, but the calculation uses 5 decimal places. And so eh, when people use this information, they should have the full 5 decimal places, if that's how it's calculated. If we want to have our rates to 2 decimal places, which I don't think Laura would want. I don't know your opinion on that, but we could do that. But we used to do uh, 4 or 3 decimal places, and then we went out to 5. So
I mean, it's just a few cents difference, right? I mean, it maybe
yeah, when you're doing billing calculations, it matters. When you're looking at the data and you're trying to understand it, it matters.
Yeah, John.
I think though, Brian, what we're just eliminating is that first zero, right? So there is some implicit simplicity
Oh.
here.
Yeah, I don't have an objection to having multiple decimal places. I do question whether we need 5 and whether if you keep it to 4, our rates would be clear. But even I defer to Laura and others on that. But even if we keep this number of things, it's much easier to read 4.5043 cents than the way it's presented now. I mean, sorry, 45.043.
I get what you meant.
Yeah. If we changed our rate schedules to be less decimal places and then the billing system calculated with less decimal places, then we could display less. But I think the only thing that's important to me is that we display what we're actually charging.
Yes, yeah, I agree with that. And if there's a reason to go out that many decimal places, fine. But just if we present it in cents, it's going to be an easier number for people to read.
I'll defer to Laura if she wants to get rid of decimal places in the system.
No, that wasn't what we were
presenting
I
it
was focusing on. I was just focusing on the presentation. Is it presented as a dollar amount or a number of cents?
Oh,
So we do need 5 decimal places in order to, with accuracy, allocate costs and collect the correct amount of revenue. You would be surprised how small a change in the 5th or 4th decimal place results in increased or decreased revenue, because we're talking about, 170 million units.
Yeah.
So just a small change does affect. So we need 5, but I don't think there's a reason why we can't flip this from dollars to cents. It is customary in the industry to present it in dollars. Just so I understand, Warren, what you're saying is we get rid of the US dollar sign.
And it would say 45.043 cents.
Would we have the cents sign to the right of the
Yes,
number?
yes.
Okay.
45.043 cents. People actually might understand that. I would bet that if we showed this bill to 100 people, 50 of them, their eyes would glaze over when they see those numbers and would not be able to determine the difference between the time of use rates.
Oh, I would say 85-90% of people would glaze over. It's a utility bill.
Yeah.
It's
Okay. We'll see if that can be done and if that makes it clearer.
I'm sure it can be done. Can we get a consensus on whether people want to see dollars or cents? Understanding that the industry custom is dollars.
yeah.
I'm
I would prefer to see
confused
dollar.
about why someone can't read a portion of a dollar. The almighty American buck, I thought, was like the universal understood unit. But I don't have a problem changing it with the cent sign, but if that's what people want, but maybe if we could get a consensus, Warren, that would be
Yeah,
great.
so Bianca and John, do you have any thoughts on that?
I was thinking that it was going to be less digits, but if it's going to be the same, and I think I think keeping it with the industry standard with the dollar in front is fine. I mean, yeah, I guess that's fine.
John, did you have a thought on this?
I do not feel strongly on this.
Okay, well, I guess I'm outvoted. It is the industry standard, but the industry makes it hard for the average person to understand things. So I'm not convinced by the industry standard, but
I
we'll leave it as
fully
it
agree
is.
with you, Warren. The industry does make it complicated in many ways.
So, okay.
All right, are we good?
Anything else? So we actually then back to solar.
Okay.
To say, we're clear on what the bill will look like for those customers who don't have solar. But we still are on how we're going to do the solar presentation. And let me ask Brian a question for you on this. And this is the solar tariff approach. You want to make sure that people are credited for their solar output based on the time of day they're producing, so they're getting greater credit when they're producing at on-peak times. Is that your big concern?
Yes.
So if we were to do a value of solar tariff that looks at projected solar output by different times of the day, and we incorporate that in the rate, does that address your concern?
No.
Why not?
So we want to get the power during the on and mid peaks.
Yes.
And if so, the solar, so what you suggested is basically creating an average of the wind expenses to credit solar customers. And the problem with that is there's no incentive to put in a battery to control your solar generation to maximize your load reduction at the substation. So people won't make the investment into, like, if I have a customer or someone who is looking at solar and they have a choice to face their array south or to put it in a southwest orientation under a crediting system that is a tariff, they would do south because they can generate numerically
point.
more kilowatt hours. But if they face it to the southwest, they generate a few less, but they generate them during the time that Concord Light needs them. And that's why it's important that the time periods be accrediting and we don't do a flat solar tariff. Because mixing a flat rate with a time of use, that's what I'm opposed to. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I see that. But it seems like we should come back and have at our next board meeting, rather than make a quick decision, have put on the agenda the issue of solar, how we're going to address it and look at those two different approaches and see if we could make a decision about it. Because it does seem like it is going to make a difference in terms of what the bill looks like.
Yeah, this discussion, I just made a comment that it's kind of putting the cart before the horse because the lead time that NSIC needs is so long and we haven't figured out the rate structure. So I agree with you. I think we should, as a board, discuss that to help kind of get the cart and horse in the right order.
Yeah, and at least what we need to do is decide on the difference between those two approaches, the solar tariff, the value of solar approach, or a time of use approach, without putting any numbers to it. You know, because at some point we have to decide what's the value the actual number that people will get for their use, but we need to decide on the concept. Okay.
Right. So when we have this discussion, it's very important to me that the on, mid, and off peak are all pass-through costs, meaning that there's cost causation. A customer's habit has a direct influence on the expense. Anything that's a shared expense or a fixed expense should be in the delivery section of the bill. That way, when we get generation from someone, we can credit them the value we would have charged them in the power portfolio section. That's the concept that's going to be that's very important to make this work.
Well, okay, we will talk about that at the next board meeting. We had one other agenda item. Laura, do you want to raise that?
Wait,
Or John?
John has his hand up.
Yeah, I see.
So just as a heads up, I need to leave at 9.
Okay.
and I was going to ask the same question, Warren, if you wanted to push through this or if you wanted to just defer this to the next meeting.
Well, let's defer it. And Laura, this wasn't an urgent topic, right?
Correct.
So we'll wait till next time on that. And are there any public comments or comments from the Select Board or the Finance Committee first? Colin.
Thanks. Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End, member of the Finance Committee, speaking on my behalf. I appreciate the thoughtful consideration on giving the solar bill presentation because I'm a solar customer. There's one aspect you have not covered, and that is I use my solar bill, the way it's currently presented, to gauge how quickly I am getting paid back for my investment. So the data points of what I've used, what I've generated, what the net is, all 3 points are relevant to me. Aside from that, thanks for all the help on getting it cleared up. Looks good.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none, can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second?
Second,
Bianca,
Yes.
John,
yes.
Brian,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. So thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Great. Thank you. Bye.